They use their media to assassinate real news. They use their schools to teach children that their president is another Hitler. They use their movie stars and singers and comedy shows and award shows to repeat their narrative over and over again. And then they use their ex-president to endorse the resistance, all to make them march, make them protest, make them scream racism and sexism and xenophobia and homophobia, to smash windows, burn cars, shut down interstates and airports, bully and terrorize the law-abiding, until the only option left is for the police to do their jobs and stop the madness. And when that happens, they'll use it as an excuse for their outrage. The only way we stop this, the only way we save our country and our freedom, is to fight this violence of lies with the clenched fist of truth. I'm the National Rifle Association of America, and I'm freedom's safest place.
Now I'm going to say something that some people are going to say is controversial. So I'll say it really slowly so all the people on the platform in the back can hear me loud and clear. Many in legacy media love mass shootings. You guys love it. Now, I'm not saying that you love the tragedy, but I am saying that you love the ratings. Crying white mothers are ratings gold to you and many in the legacy media in the back. And notice I said crying white mothers because there are thousands of grieving black mothers in Chicago every weekend, and you don't see town halls for them, do you? Where's the CNN town hall for Chicago? Where's the CNN town hall for sanctuary cities? Where was the CNN town hall for Jamil Shaw Sr., whose son was murdered by someone who illegally entered the country and had been deported repeatedly? Where was his voice? Where was the voice of those junior ROTC members last night, CNN? If it bleeds, it leads, doesn't it? And I don't mean to ignore you all here, but I'm really looking at a lot of the legacy media back there on the platform. And you can write whatever you want about me, and you can come find me in the hallways, and you can scream at me, and you can try to confront me. But I'm here, we're not going anywhere. I call BS.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. I'm Dana Loesch, and this season, I'm going to do the job the media won't. Defend the relevance of the one freedom that guarantees all the others, the Second Amendment. We'll also show you why the right to keep and bear arms has never been more widely used and more relevant in American society than it is right now. You've been warned. You might learn something.
I'm sorry, do we have a militia in this country? Is there a militia here? Because it still doesn't say individual.
See, she's reading the Second Amendment, and I think it's
we don't have a militia.
Can't we hold true the sanctity of the Second Amendment while still having common sense?
The purpose is to dry up the supply of these weapons over time.
The Second Amendment doesn't apply at all. None of you get to have weapons for any purpose.
What is it about us that makes us so dogged and insistent on having access to guns as the Second Amendment, worshiping it? We act like it's the Second Commandment, not the Second Amendment.
That's right. Repeal the Second Amendment.
As I've gotten older and watched how things progress, I'm starting to believe it a lot more, where that kind of just complete societal breakdown, anarchy, tyranny, whatever, is only a generation or two away if things get out of hand.
The world watched in shock as a military coup unfolded in Turkey.
Everyone wants to live in this state of kittens and sunshine, where they think that everything's perfect, that we're the sophisticated generation, and nothing like this happens anymore. But when people grow apathetic, that's when tyranny flourishes.
It's like living in a house with a fire extinguisher for 20 years and never having to use it, and then saying one day, you know what, I don't think we need this thing anymore. We haven't had a fire in 20 years.
When you looked at what was going on in Europe at the time, there were no guarantees for the people to keep and bear arms. And the authors of the Federalist Papers noted that. They said this is one of the main differences between the United States and the European countries, is that here in the United States, you did have a body of people who were capable of bearing arms for defense of themselves and their state.
People say, well, the founders couldn't have imagined this or that. You're absolutely right, they couldn't. There's no way they could have imagined the horrors of the 20th century. Hundreds of millions of people killed by their own governments.
And if you look back at all of the dictators throughout history, before they rose to power, they understood the two things you need. You need to disarm the people, you need to control the press. What are our first two amendments?
Germany was one of the most civilized societies in history, basically. If you look at contributions to philosophy and music and literature, and yet it's a society where you had the instigation. First you had the seemingly innocuous disarming of people in the Weimar Republic, and then you had the use of all those registration records that were created to disarm their political enemies, social democrats and anybody who disagreed with the Nazi Party, and then finally to disarm the Jews of Germany.
There's this odd modern conception that unless a right is written down, the government can interfere. But that's incorrect, and it runs completely against how the founders saw the setup of the country.
Nobody gave me the right to speak freely, to worship as I want, or to carry arms to defend myself, my family, and my community. And no one can take them away. No one has that right to take the natural rights of others.
These are rights that were inherent to us, being American citizens, born on this soil. These are rights that we immediately come out of the womb with.
There was never a time that predated them. There'll never be a time that outdates them.
But this has been a decades-long debate, the interpretation of the Second Amendment. Yes. You know, an individual's right to bear arms,
right,
or is it a
militia right?
Yes.
Exactly.
So it's been claimed that the Heller decision by the Supreme Court turned reality upside down and recognized a right to keep and bear arms by the people that never really existed, and that the court just invented the right.
That decision, which struck down Washington, D.C.'s handgun ban, was the culmination of a decades-long lobbying push by the gun industry to twist the Second Amendment into something that would help it sell more weapons.
That's just a propaganda argument.
If you look not just at the Second Amendment, but at the state-level equivalents, right back to the 18th century, they usually stipulate, or the courts have interpreted them to mean that the right to keep and bear arms resides at the individual level as much as anything else.
We see this argument all the time. The Founding Fathers could never have envisioned semi-automatic rifles. They could never have envisioned the quote-unquote modern battlefield weapons of war, and therefore the Second Amendment is null and void.
Do you think that the founders anticipated assault weapons that could very quickly kill 50 people?
When we no longer need people to keep muskets in their home, then the Second Amendment has no function.
But they never seem to make that argument when it comes to the First Amendment.
This idea that somehow time has made the Second Amendment anachronistic is an idiotic argument, because that's the same thing as saying, well, our speech rights are completely limited to quill and parchment.
The Second Amendment refers to arms, and if you look at common law definitions of arms at the time, it didn't mean muskets. It meant arms, anything that you could carry individually, that you could strike with. The idea of banning common weapons was also alien. Purely in the sense that even in the founding era, all sorts of new and different weaponry was available.
A weapon in the hand of a tyrant, whether it's a musket or a saber or a spear or an AK-47, is still a tool of oppression. And that same tool in the hands of a free citizen is still a shield from oppression, whether it's 1797 or 2016.
The only point at which one could feasibly say that the Second Amendment has outlived its usefulness is if you can guarantee peace for everybody, and if you can guarantee that men will not be corrupted by power. And you cannot do those things. You could not do those things in 1791. You couldn't do those things in 1850. You can't do those things now.
If you cannot adequately protect yourself, meaning that your government has restricted the means by which you could utilize something to adequately protect yourself, not only from them, but from other threats to your life, you are not free. Period. You are not free. You're a prisoner.
We can close the book on the lie that the NRA somehow made up the individual right to bear arms during the 20th century. History clearly shows that our interpretation of the Second Amendment is the same as what Americans have always known and the Founding Fathers intended. I think that they'd be proud of us for staying the course and disgusted by the politicians and media personalities who are so eager to deprive us of our rights. Don't you love it when politicians like Hillary Clinton and Michael Bloomberg pontificate about the evils of guns while their armed security scans the crowd for threats? The truth is, gun control is for the rich and elite, those who are already well protected. Since they don't personally feel the need for a firearm, they don't understand the plight of Americans who have to live in violent, crime-infected areas and can't afford high-tech security measures, let alone bodyguards. Or maybe they do understand, but they don't care, which is why the Second Amendment applies to all of us in the first place. So the lives of average citizens never depend on the generosity of the elite.
There's a certain irony in that the majority of the politicians and the public figures who are hell-bent on either restricting or completely abolishing the Second Amendment themselves enjoy armed security.
So wasn't it Charlie Rangel who said, you know, I deserve and my colleagues in Congress deserve armed protection, but my constituents don't necessarily deserve it?
Well, law-abiding citizens just shouldn't have to carry a gun. You know that, so you're not going to push me in that direction.
But you're protected by guns all over the place here in the Capitol.
Well, that's a little different. I think we need to be protected down here.
Once they make that sort of argument, they've made clear, in their mind, their lives are worth protecting, and the only justification they need is the power of political office.
If you really believe in gun control, you should be willing to put a sign up in your window that says gun-free zone at your house and your congressional office, your mansion in Hollywood.
When we implement these gun control laws, who's not going to have to abide by them? When they ban assault weapons, are they banning them from police officers? Are they banning them from security people? Are they banning them from security personnel? They're not. Who's in a position to hire these people with these guns? These elite individuals.
So I got a gun, yeah.
You feel funny with it around?
Yeah, I don't think that you know, I have enough security where I don't, you know, need to worry about that.
And to me, that is the most disgusting component about this gun debate. Above all else, is the idea that you have a group of people who aren't even going to abide by these same laws, trying to inflict and instill these same laws on everybody else. Like, you are not the majority of America. Like, there's a whole middle America who does not live like this.
I don't begrudge them for even having armed security, so long as they don't argue that I can't have armed security. Their armed security might be a guy from a firm that they hire. My armed security is myself.
In fact, there is an even deeper irony, and that is that the same politicians who raise a fuss if a voter has to pick up a $7 ID card are entirely happy to burden poor Americans, more vulnerable Americans, with all sorts of fees and expensive and time-consuming processes before they can get their hands on a firearm.
If you have to pay hundreds of dollars in fees to simply apply to get permission to own a firearm, and that money doesn't come back if you get rejected, and you can get rejected for no reason whatsoever, what's the result going to be? Most people aren't going to bother forking over hundreds of dollars just to be told, no, you can't own a gun.
You know, these ideas of, bullet taxes and increasing paperwork to exercise your Second Amendment rights. Look, that's not going to affect a trial lawyer like me. I'm going to pay what I have to pay. I'm going to do what I have to do. But what if you're somebody, who's not a lawyer? What if you're somebody who's just getting by?
Poor people want to live their own lives with dignity and in control of their lives just like anybody else. And taking from somebody who doesn't have much money the ability to defend themselves is criminal.
That's not how rights work in free countries. That's not how rights work in the United States, and nor should it ever be.
Look, it's not the connected that are ever left out. It's the disconnected. It's the disenfranchised. It's these people who deserve the right to protect themselves. They're the ones who need the protection.
It doesn't say the right of the property owner to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The right of the rich guy to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. It is the right of the people. So yes, it applies to all of us.
It doesn't surprise me when someone who has grown up in a safe, affluent environment can't understand the point of owning a gun. Thank God our freedom doesn't rest in the hands of their ignorant, uninformed opinions. Here's a little history for you. Gun control in America is rooted in racism. That's right. The modern gun control movement is just today's version of the exact policies used to keep firearms out of the hands of freed slaves after the Civil War. Like we showed you last episode, gun control doesn't harm the powerful, connected, protected people who push for it. It's always been about controlling a segment of the population. And what better way to maintain dominance over an ethnic group than to ensure they're disarmed? Don't believe me? Keep watching.
Gun control has absolutely nothing to do ideologically with the control of firearms. If you do even a most cursory look at history between guns and gun ownership, you will find that without question, gun laws were created to restrict gun ownership from certain classes of people.
Long before the revolution, long before the drafting of the Second Amendment, laws were passed in the various colonies in what is now the United States to take away guns from minorities.
The first gun control laws in America start in 1620 in Virginia, when the legislature enacts a law saying, don't let black people have guns. And that's been sort of the key theme of American gun control for centuries ever after.
In the famous Dred Scott opinion, Justice Taney makes it clear that one of the reasons blacks should not be treated as equal citizens is that if they are, they will enjoy the right to keep and bear arms wheresoever they go.
It wasn't that they said the Second Amendment doesn't apply to these people. It was they're not considered people. Because if they're considered people, they would have the right to own firearms.
Even though the slaves were freed by the 13th Amendment, some states still prohibited black people from being armed.
And so you get a whole spate of state-level laws, either explicitly barring African Americans from enjoying their civil rights, or doing so cleverly. For example, by restricting what guns are available, maybe to those who served in the Confederate Army. Well, we all know who served in the Confederate Army and who didn't. You do the math.
It was designed as a tool, in the words that they used, to prevent any reprisals against former slave owners.
You know, America's first domestic terrorist organization was the Ku Klux Klan.
And individuals who were probably local government officials who would ride on horses throughout the black community to discourage people from not only owning firearms, but from also engaging in other civic duties such as voting.
I can't think of anything more simplistic than the idea of how do you terrorize a group of people who are armed? You really can't. So what do? You do everything in your power to disarm them in every way.
If you read Ida B. Wells in the 1890s, she makes it very clear that the men who got away from the lynch mobs were the men who were armed. And in fact, she says that a Winchester rifle should hang in pride of place in any Afro-American home.
You can't lynch people who are armed. You can't burn crosses in the yards of people who are armed. So they really worked hard to make sure that blacks who were free couldn't buy and own firearms, because then they could defend themselves.
It's underreported, but we all know Rosa Parks for her bravery on the bus. But Rosa Parks used to sit on her porch with her grandfather with a shotgun in her hands in case the Klan came onto her property and attempted to kill her and her family purely because they were black.
Our history is that we have always utilized and exercised our right to bear arms because it's been life or death.
So the 14th Amendment came along after the 13th and said, these rights belong to everybody. And you can't do this on the basis of, well, we got a state law that says you can't arm newly freed slaves.
When a criminal starts misusing me, I am going to use whatever is necessary to get that criminal off my back.
What is there to prevent a group such as the Black Panthers from walking right into the governor's office?
As of today, very little. We hope to improve that situation in the next couple of days.
All the way up until the 1968 gun law, you have basically attempts to disarm black people.
The 1968 Gun Control Act is an attempt to stop poor people from buying guns, poor people who were disproportionately black.
So you have these laws that were written in a race-neutral way, but were in fact aimed only at black people and enforced only against black people.
You have no right to take my gun away from me. You don't know the Constitution, right?
Sure we do. We're well aware of the Constitution.
For the so-called Saturday night special bans, these firearms, although they did not have fine workmanship and that they were inexpensive, they were still available to be used to defend yourself and to defend your home. And one of the most interesting things about these laws that were put on the books to discriminate against black people is that these are the common anti-gun laws that politicians this very day in the year 2016 try to adopt and to prevent certain people from owning a firearm.
Persons wishing to purchase ammunition first acquire a permit, then pass an extensive background check.
And it requires gun owners to present themselves to police for a background check, photographing, and fingerprinting.
So, yeah, I think there's a racist component in the existing gun control movement, but they don't say that openly because you can't say things like that.
And so the more that people in my community have heard about our history and know about our history, the more that gun control has been shown and proven to be racist policies that have continued to keep people in our community down.
I don't by any stretch of the imagination believe that gun control has kept the black community safe. And the reason why I don't believe that is the same reason why I don't think gun control has kept the white community safe. It just doesn't keep anyone safe. If I'm a single parent mother and I can't afford a car, I have to take the bus. Not only that, I have to work 2 jobs, so I'm coming home late at night, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning by myself. I'm getting paid in cash. People know I'm getting paid in cash. So now I have to get on the bus and then have to get off the bus at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and then walk home in a bad, shitty neighborhood, knowing that people know that I have cash on me? Come on, man.
There's a reason why in Chicago now we're seeing a record number of minorities inside the most violent neighborhoods applying for their concealed carry permits to finally try and put an end to criminals running their streets.
Why would you limit someone's ability to protect themselves in that environment? I just don't get it.
In 2010, when the Second Amendment was finally incorporated to the states, as was the intention of the 14th Amendment in the mid-1860s, it was a black man, Otis McDonald, who brought the case.
There were so many people in the city, so many people in the state that's being victimized by gun laws that only apply to the law-abiding citizens. How can that be right? It can't be right.
a great guy. I consider him one of my personal heroes. You know, someone who lived in an urban environment. In his case, we're talking about the city of Chicago. You know, he's been there for a while and was a fixture. And he just realized that it was not safe.
McDonald says his neighborhood has changed, more crime. He's been broken into 3 times, and he's long since concluded that the gun ban is a bust.
The gangbangers and drug dealers were taking over my neighborhood. They were taking over me, literally, and I was being threatened.
I live in a bad environment. I want a gun to protect myself, but the laws in this place won't let me do that.
And he had to fight Lisa Madigan and everybody else in Chicago for that right to do it. He's a civil rights hero, and he gets none of the accolades for being such.
Like, we had to go to court for that. Like, we had to go to the Supreme Court to let somebody own a gun in their own house to protect themselves because they live in a bad environment. That had to go all the way to the Supreme Court. Where in the world does that make any sense?
The racist roots of gun control have been so well hidden by the mass media and public education system that you've probably never heard any of that before. But it's the truth. The tender-hearted do-gooders of the contemporary movement are still serving that same racist end. This isn't a minor, uncomfortable truth about American gun control. It's the one fact that discredits the movement entirely. The left loves to talk about empowering women, but the real litmus test for that is your support for the Second Amendment. Because if you don't support a woman's right to choose to defend herself against a rapist with a firearm, you don't support women, period. Despite the media doing everything possible to tell us that we're not smart enough or capable enough to use firearms, millions upon millions of women are purchasing guns, signing up for carry permits, and defending their lives and their families' lives.
In terms of the market for gun safety training and training to acquire a concealed pistol license. Nowadays, my classes are at least half women.
If you go to any local shooting range, you'll see plenty of women target shooting or participating in competitions, and more are hunting. But I think the biggest increase has been the simple recognition of the right of self-defense.
Why do you carry? Protection. I feel safe. Yeah.
I think most women would say their worst fear is to be raped. I mean, it's a terrifying thing that women have to live with. And a lot can happen in the 10 minutes after you call the cops.
I'm here by myself with my infant baby. Can I please get a dispatcher out here immediately? Are your doors locked? Yes, I've got 2 guns in my hand. Is it okay to shoot him if he comes in the store? I can't tell you that you can do that, but you do what you have to do to protect your baby.
I'm 5'1" and a half and less than 110 pounds, I'll say. And every man's gonna be bigger than me, and they're gonna be stronger than me.
I can take all the self-defense classes I want. I can spend 3 years in Krav Maga. He still stands a really good chance of hurting me.
And a firearm is the only thing that equalizes me against somebody that weighs, let's say, 100 pounds more than me. I can't judo or karate my way out of that thing. A firearm is the only thing that gives me a fighting chance.
There are some people, believe it or not, who believe that a woman cannot appropriately and effectively use a firearm for self-defense.
Because you just don't know who you're going to be shooting at. And you don't know if you feel like you're going to be raped, or if you feel like someone's been following you around, or if you feel like you're in trouble, and when you may actually not be, that you pop out that gun and you pop around at somebody.
As a personal protection instructor from the last 10 years or so, I can tell you there is absolutely nothing different about training a woman to use a firearm than it is to train a man.
In the past decades, there are more women who are single heads of household in unmarried situations. They are the adult in the household. And it makes a person think, what are all of my obligations? And defending the family is one of those.
I have a son at home who counts on me to come home.
as a mother who carries, as a mother who has a concealed carry permit, that's an extension of me protecting my children.
I'm the mama bear here. These are my cubs. I gotta do what I can to protect them.
My mom is anti-gun, and my family is in general. And the proudest moment I had was showing my mom how to use a shotgun in the house. She felt more protected because she knew how to protect her children.
I let them know I had a gun once they was in the house.
The chief of police says she did the right thing.
From the same reasons why you see more women starting their own small businesses, more women taking leadership roles at all kinds of levels, more women speaking out and being assertive and standing up for their rights on millions of issues. That trend of American women becoming ever more confident about their rights and abilities.
As Rebecca wrestled with child, she called for her sleeping daughter to grab her gun.
I loved her before, I love her now, but she's my hero. It could have turned out to be very tragic for us if she did not have her permit and we didn't have that gun in the house.
It's part of her humanity, being able not only to defend her life, but I think what we've lost in this conversation is also defend her dignity.
I didn't realize how much of a subconscious fear I had of someone coming in at night and hurting me. And it's actually just gone away because I know I can defend myself.
I mean, talk about a war on women. I think those who would disarm women, that's a war on women. If a woman doesn't even have a free choice to protect herself from a home invasion, a rapist, a robbery, or whatever, that's the ultimate form of disrespect for personhood, whether it's in a feminist context or any context.
No, I don't think that you can advocate for women's rights and then also say that a woman should not have the right to protect themselves with a firearm.
I think it's incredibly hypocritical for any politician to talk about a woman's right to choose what happens to her body without acknowledging that they have the right to protect that body and they have the right to choose how to protect their body.
They seem to want to put that responsibility on someone else who can't provide it, specifically the government.
At the time of my attack, I had obtained my concealed carry weapons permit. However, being a law-abiding citizen, I left my permitted weapon at home, and the very law that was meant to ensure my safety guaranteed James Bila an unmatched victim.
I just want to say that actually statistics are not on your side, even if you had had a gun. Chances are that if you had had a gun, then he would have been able to get that from you and possibly use it against you.
When I hear them say things to me like, you know, you have more of a chance of being harmed by your own gun, that is not their job.
It is amazing how people who've never been in that situation can make those decisions for other women.
Well, the poor little woman. Poor little woman. What if she's being abused by a guy? Her only answer is a gun. You know, first of all, the only answer is not a gun. If that woman is in that much concern that she's got to wait, you know, that she can't wait for a few days, you know, she really needs to find other venues to keep herself safe. You know, a gun alone is not going to do it.
How long should a woman have to wait if she's being stalked before she can obtain a firearm? My answer is the time it takes for her to get in her car and drive to the gun store and make that purchase.
There's the story of Carol Bound, who was a hairdresser who lived in New Jersey, and she was one of those women who wanted to go and get her concealed carry permit. She had a very good reason for doing so. Not that you need a good reason, but her reason was very pressing because she was dealing with an ex-boyfriend who was stalking her and who was violent and who was threatening.
And that's when she took steps to protect herself by getting a restraining order, installing an alarm system, and security cameras on her house.
You know how many women have been killed by stalkers or abusive spouses that had a restraining order?
Each one at the time of her death had a restraining order barring...
We have the restraining order detailing...
Even an order of protection was not enough to keep her safe. She did everything right, filing for a personal order of protection.
In that situation, whether it's me, whether it's any woman who has someone who wants to do her harm, has said they want to do her harm, or they know is going to do her harm, and is armed, a restraining order is a piece of paper.
She knew that she was her own first responder. So she went and applied to get a concealed carry permit. But of course, New Jersey has a long waiting period. And while she was waiting for New Jersey to decide whether or not she, a woman who was afraid and living in fear from her violent ex-boyfriend, could get a firearm, she was murdered in her driveway by her ex-boyfriend while she was waiting to get her firearm.
but nothing was enough to save Carol Brown's life from a bitter ex-boyfriend who came to her house and stabbed her multiple times until she died.
I mean, she was a wonderful girl, very loving.
An armed society is a polite society, and armed and trained women mean fewer rape victims, mean fewer assault victims, mean fewer soft targets. That's what that means. We're not going to give up that right. Armed and trained women, they make the world a better place to live in. They really do. Michael Bloomberg and Hillary Clinton have never walked the floor of an NRA convention. I have. And so have literally thousands of women who didn't simply go to indulge their husbands for the day, but women who were just as interested as their male counterparts in checking out the latest from Browning or fawning over the slimmer Glock varieties. These women are the face of the empowered American female. So you better get used to women keeping and bearing arms. We had the divine right to bear arms before men decided we could vote, and we're not giving it up without a fight. LGBT Americans grow up knowing that they could be the next victim of a hate crime. The liberal media and political left refuse to identify and condemn radical Islamic terror and the ideology of hatred that fuels it, an ideology that throws LGBT people off of rooftops to their deaths in many parts of the world, while they mock the founding principles of our country as bigoted and outdated. But for LGBT American citizens, it's those old, fat, white founders and their Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms that gives them the freedom of a fighting chance.
I think one of the most encouraging things we've seen over the last 20 years is the willingness of non-traditional groups to get involved in gun ownership.
Not only in the NRA, but across the country, gun ownership is breaking barriers in terms of race and gender.
Second Amendment rights are especially relevant to anyone who's disenfranchised or discriminated against or threatened. And when you talk about the LGBT community, we have seen examples of them being targeted, not only by bullies and punks, but by ideological killers like the person in Orlando.
What happened in Orlando was not the first case of a terror attack against the gay community. This was not the first attack. It won't be the last attack either. The management of the Shiloh shooting range in Houston, Texas, received an unexpected response when they reached out to the LGBT community in the wake of Orlando.
It was a Sunday morning. We woke up. My dad and I were taking a pistol class together. We were talking, we needed to do something about this. We've got a good friend of ours who shoots here on a regular basis, and he's a gay man. His name is Ryan Thomas.
I've had my license to carry for, a couple of years. After Orlando, things, heightened.
Anytime that something like that is to happen in the community, it has an effect.
We decided that we wanted to do something for Ryan's friends. And so we offered Ryan to, tell his buddies, tell his friends that they could come out here and get a free license to carry class. We figured at most Ryan might be able to get us 20 to 40 members of the LGBT community. And 653 signups later, we then found out just how social our friend Ryan was.
As soon as it hit the news, it blew up like crazy. The phones were just ringing off the hook. The email server went down. It crashed. We had such a big response to it.
I dreamed about phones ringing for the next 10 days because that's all that happened from the time I walked in the door till the time that I closed up the shop at night.
We really thought it was going to be like 1 or 2 classes maybe, and it was just filling up, and we can only accommodate so many in any given class.
I was shocked and surprised at the response that I got, not only from the community itself, but from the shooting community. I had licensed to carry instructors from all over the state send me emails and call me and ask if there was anything they could do, from teaching a class to just coming in and sweeping up brass behind the shooters.
He got a lot of threats from people that, because he was trying to do it. So he actually had volunteers standing out here, standing in the sun, in the middle of Texas heat.
Veterans.
Pouring sweat to make sure that we were safe.
What kind of smart guy threatens a shooting range?
Exactly, yeah.
When we did this offer to the LGBT community, we had no idea what the response would be. And this has been a tremendously fulfilling experience that we've had, welcoming in a new group of gun rights advocates, potential Second Amendment advocates. I challenge other gun shops, gun ranges, licensed to carry instructors, do the same thing.
It's helped out more than what he could probably even ever imagine. It's not that hard to do. It's actually very safe.
Just shooting back and forth.
Dead bodies everywhere.
Hey, still shooting.
It's sad that it took a massacre to make people understand that. That's the bad thing.
I've always thought about it before, but I definitely have to say that with what has happened in Orlando, it was the catalyst that really led me to my decision. And also, I don't know if y'all remember, but at F-Bar, there's a boy, he was shot, only 22 years old. A lot of the media has kept that on the hush, too. There's a lot that we know about that nobody else does.
Because we're not important enough.
Yeah.
We're the gay community.
Exactly.
The only place they could go to judgment-free was taken away from them in one fell swoop, and it was taken away in a rather horrific manner. And that was their wake-up call.
I actually work a lot in bars, and ever since I took this class, I actually have asked myself, like, what's gonna happen? You know, I mean, the bouncer doesn't have a gun. You know, somebody could come in, take down the bouncer, there you go. There, you know, it's gonna be a bunch of chaos again.
It turns into the proverbial human hunting ground.
Exactly. Everything that's happened, I just think any moment.
In the wake of Orlando, members of the LGBT community across the nation are determined never again to be sitting ducks in the face of violent hatred.
I think the right to keep and bear arms is important to everybody, but I think it is going to be most necessary for those who are most at risk of becoming the victims of violent crime. And members of the LGBT community have been targeted for crimes because of who they are.
No one deserves to be murdered for their sexual orientation. Everyone should have the right to defend themselves.
But yet, we have individuals out here advocating against their ability to do that. Where in the world does that make any sense? It doesn't.
People can sit here and talk about equality 6 ways to Sunday, but you don't really believe in equality if you do not believe in the equal opportunity of self-defense. And denying a group the ability to protect themselves, that to me is the height of bigotry. The growing ranks of LGBT gun owners is good news for that community's ability to defend against hatred. But the trend also shows the relevance of firearm ownership in the 21st century, as people from all demographics and walks of life find comfort in their rights. I hope that we'll see more firearm trainers and range owners reaching out in the manner that we've seen here, and more gun owners reaching out to educate our fellow citizens of all backgrounds about the importance of their rights. Today's America is plagued by urban riots and domestic ISIS sympathizers. Intelligence officials fear our power grid is vulnerable to long-term outages at the hands of committed attackers or natural disasters. We can never predict what the future holds, but as long as we have our rights, we can prepare.
And we should be proud of our society and our institutions. We should also recognize that human beings aren't not supermen, that they have not evolved out of their nature, and that when there is a natural disaster or a terrorist attack, the fabric of society can fray.
The irony is, the reason why the Second Amendment is so critical is because our society is so safe. It lulls us into complacency.
We have the luxury to hope for the best and think for the best. You know, I'm not planning on getting in a wreck on the way home, but that doesn't mean I'm not gonna put my seatbelt on.
You may be in a situation where normally if you call 911 for a life-threatening emergency, the average response time is 11 minutes, which means you've got the responsibility to keep yourself and your family alive in those 11 minutes till law enforcement can get there.
You have a breakdown where emergency personnel can't get to you, and at that moment more than ever, you are your first and only line of defense.
But in a natural disaster, you may call 911 and there may be nobody on the other line. Or they may tell you, sorry, nobody's ever coming. And it's up to you to keep your community safe and to keep yourself safe.
The Second Amendment becomes more relevant than ever in the aftermath of a disaster like Hurricane Katrina.
There is looting and lawlessness overwhelming in some places.
You know, my understanding is that martial law is in effect.
One police officer said at some point this afternoon, someone drove by and actually shot at some of these people.
The police and National Guard going street by street, house to house, and instructions to disarm anyone inside.
No one will be able to be armed. We will take all weapons.
When governments say, it's such a scary time, we must collect everyone's firearms for their own good, what they're not admitting is the fact that law enforcement is tapped.
And you have situations where, unfortunately, people who were bad before and are still going to be bad now, taking advantage of the lawlessness.
There was some looting along one of the main streets downtown, which is Canal Street. They also said that there were several shootings in and around the area.
If you can't pull the gun out of the bedroom, if you can't pull the gun out of your wife's purse, the gun out of the truck, and guard your house may have no protection. Even worse, your life may have no protection.
They determined that no probable cause exists to file any charge against Officer Wilson and returned a no true bill on each of the 5 indictments.
We live about 20 minutes away from Ferguson, and it was like a horrifying night, that night that the verdict came out, and then they set Ferguson on fire.
This is no longer peaceful protest. Please evacuate the area. We are trying to get to the next fire.
The only stores that weren't looted and burned down in Ferguson were the ones where you had shop owners standing in front of them with firearms to protect not just their stores, but also the employees inside.
It was like 1 second, nothing is going on. The next second, the Quick Trip's on fire, the meat market's on fire. It was a real eye-opener because I felt like it could be at our house or in our neighborhood or where we lived.
We have a history of seeing these things happen. We saw what happened with the LA riots as well.
The jury in the Rodney King case has delivered its verdict, and not one of the 4 police officers seen on videotape beating Mr. King a year ago is guilty of using excessive force. They've all been found not guilty.
Here in Los Angeles this evening, there is a sense the city is sitting on a real emotional powder keg.
Many on these streets believe the outnumbered police and firefighters will continue to be overwhelmed for some time to come.
I had joined the California Army National Guard. And I remember when I had joined the unit about 3 months before, I'd said, hey, are we ever going to get called up? And they kind of laughed at me. Well, they weren't laughing now.
2 people dragged from cars in this intersection, and then we saw the driver of that truck pulled out of his car and beat up.
The LA riots, initially, the government, law enforcement, civil authorities simply could not provide any modicum of protection for the citizens.
Within a matter of hours, you had the Rodney King verdict, and a couple hours later, this city was on fire.
My soldiers, in a number of cases over the first 2 to 3 days, received incoming fire from rioters, to include, in some cases, automatic weapons fire with obviously illegal automatic weapons in South Central LA.
I saw the fear in people's eyes, unable to defend themselves. There were no police. There was no control. It was only you and the bad guys, and there were a lot of bad guys.
This is attempted murder.
Those citizens who were fortunate enough to have their own weapons, as the Koreans did in Koreatown, and some others that I am aware of who did manage to protect their homes and businesses, were absolutely critical in the early stages of the response until the police could get themselves organized and reinforced.
Now, that man up there seems to be holding a shotgun, Larry, if I'm not mistaken.
I think he's holding a shotgun, and I think one of his purposes is he wants potential looters to see it. I think he wants people, all of them up there, want people to see that they are armed and that you enter their properties at some risk.
The story of the Korean shop owners is well known. They armed themselves, many of them ex-Republic of Korea soldiers, and they defended their shops, and their shops were not burned. The people who couldn't defend themselves, they were burned out.
We want to protect our property. That's it.
You own a business, you have a right to protect that business. You know, in light of the fact that the social order collapsed and government services are overwhelmed.
I learned there, even a stable society like America's is really on a razor's edge.
I do not think that most citizens who have not experienced it directly can begin to appreciate the rapidity and the severity with which civil order and even infrastructure capability, law enforcement capability, civil governance completely deteriorates.
It converted a lot of people to the Second Amendment. They'd never thought of it before because they take their freedom for granted. They took their safety for granted, but nothing's for granted. We have these natural rights because nothing is for granted.
Here's the thing about unpredictable, unlikely events. They happen. If you want to live your life pretending that the government will always be able to keep you safe, be my guest. But your right to keep and bear arms could be the very real last lifeline you have. Millions of Americans know firsthand how fast law and order can break down, and I promise you, those people truly treasure their right to keep and bear arms. If the left's logic was correct, there would be millions of people dead in the streets every day in America, because tens of millions of Americans in every state are licensed to carry firearms in defense of their lives, their families' lives, and their fellow citizens' lives. But it turns out Americans with licenses to carry permits are the most statistically law-abiding group in the entire country. It's almost as if our natural God-given freedom isn't such a bad idea.
The concealed carry movement in the United States really is the political success story for the people, the best that I've ever been aware of.
So we've seen concealed carry laws come to fruition in all 50 states now.
And Florida really started that. Crime was high. Politicians were realizing that the government couldn't take care of the individual citizens.
Do you have control over the entire area or not?
No, in some sections of Miami we do not. We're not able to respond to some fires depending on the area. We've sent fire units in accompanied by police officers, and they've had to withdraw because of sniper fire and other acts of violence directed to them.
And the one thing they determined they could do without spending a lot of taxpayer dollars is to empower the people to take their self-defense into their own hands.
I've got a little boy. I'm going to protect him. I'm going to protect my property. I never did anything to them people. They don't have no right coming in here and doing something to me.
In the 80s, Florida was the state that went shall issue and set the trend that just swept the country. In a shall issue state, the burden is put on the state. Unless the applicant has something in his criminal record that should prevent him from having a gun, they have to issue the permit. When they got ready to do that, everybody warned, blood in the streets, going to be the wild, wild west. Guess what? No, what happened is tourists felt safe again to go to the rest area.
Fast forward to a couple of years ago when Illinois is the 50th state to adopt concealed carry. And precisely the same thing was predicted by the governor.
Our state was told by a federal court that we must adopt a law dealing with concealed carry. I felt that ruling was wrong then. I still feel it's wrong. It's not been appealed. We therefore have to take action to protect the public safety of the people of Illinois.
At every turn in the road, they use the same argument, saying that law-abiding citizens should be unarmed because if we allow them to be armed in this manner, there's going to be needless bloodshed, and it doesn't happen.
Do you have evidence of this? Because it is not out there.
When the first concealed carry permit was issued here on December 18, 2013, there were predictions that Illinois would turn into the Wild West. That, of course, hasn't happened.
I trust law-abiding citizens. I trust law-abiding citizens with firearms.
Hoosiers not only arming themselves in big numbers, but they also want to carry their firearms with them in public. And with the growing number of people with guns, there's also growing concern they might get into the hands of people who shouldn't possess a weapon.
Texas now has 580,000 permit holders. This is back in 2012. 120 were convicted of misdemeanors and felonies. Very few of those actually involved guns. If you could imagine a city of 580, 600,000 people and only 120 people getting arrested, it would be the safest single jurisdiction in the world.
The campus carry bill was approved a few months ago by the Texas legislature. Nearly 400 UT Austin professors have joined a protest group called Gun Free UT.
When campus carry became more popular, people were going to start shooting each other over their grades.
The issue is not so much somebody coming into the classroom from the outside. It's rather a student in the classroom, or more likely a student in my office who's upset about a grade and who pulls a gun on me.
When I talk to students, if I told them that, hey, you have to be 21 years of age and older and you have to pass a mental health background check and a criminal background check and all these restrictions that come with concealed carry, most of them would come around and be very open to campus carry.
The opposition to campus carry stems from the touching belief that if you put up a sign, then somebody who is hell-bent on hurting other people will reconsider.
Studies have shown that our generation is 7% less likely to support gun control than the previous generation.
We're starting to understand more and more the importance of self-reliance and independence. We have more guns in this country than we've ever had in the history of this country, yet crime is at a downward trend.
Today, in every state, there is some means by which you can keep and bear concealed arms. That's a trend. That's the Constitution growing as we come to the understanding that the Second Amendment is not a dead letter.
On the flip side, look at a state like California. California's passing laws on storage in different cities. They're passing statewide bans. They've instituted them now on high-capacity magazines. They're expanding the assault weapons ban. I wrote recently, California is the hardest state in the union for a law-abiding citizen to acquire a gun, much less carry one.
Frankly, you do not need a weapon to buy a cheeseburger or a cup of coffee. You need an ATM card or a $5 bill.
The only reason the person would openly carry a firearm is to use it or to make people believe they would use it. And to me, this is an act of intimidation.
Well, I'm not a carry holder myself because I live in Los Angeles County. I am a retired Army infantry colonel who commanded at the battalion and deputy command at the brigade level. I am a graduate of the Army War College. I have been in Operation Desert Storm and Operation Enduring Freedom in Kosovo. I'm not a concealed carry holder here in Los Angeles because apparently no one is qualified to be one.
In Washington, D.C., in order to get a concealed carry license, you have to show that there is a specific ongoing threat against your life, and you have to provide documentation.
You can't have it called general danger. You have to have a specific reason. You have to prove it.
When you have to prove that your life's in danger, your family or your property, or you have the type of business where you carry large sums of money, cash or jewelry, and under those circumstances, that's why you can have a concealed carry in the District of Columbia.
The Second Amendment right to bear arms just doesn't fully apply here?
Well, I believe when the Second Amendment was written, that was more or less for when the British were coming.
And then once you've done that, once you've demonstrated to the government that, look, here is somebody who is actively threatening me, DC says, well, we'll get back to you in a month and let you know if you can get your concealed carry license. That's ridiculous.
It is so ridiculous that it took me 4 months, a 5-hour course, a written test, hundreds of dollars in fees to have a gun in my home to protect myself when I could cross the river to Virginia, which is a mile away, and go through a 15-minute NICS check to make sure that I'm not a felon and not a wife abuser, not a drug addict, and have a gun in my home to protect myself.
Your gun rights should not be subject to any arbitrary geographical boundaries.
I certainly know from experience that violent crime occurs at a moment when you never expect it.
In 2009, my husband, Benjamin, was murdered right in front of me by a man who was stalking me.
Police say this all started around 10:30 here at Johnny's off Nolensville Pike. Police say the bar was hosting a karaoke night when an irate customer came in and started harassing the couple who runs the karaoke machine business. Police say the man has harassed the same couple at different bars across the area in the past. When management approached him, he pulled out a gun and shot the man who was in a karaoke booth several times. The man did die inside the bar.
This happened in a gun-free zone, a restaurant. And because of Tennessee state law at the time, I had to leave my permitted firearm that I normally carried for self-defense locked in my vehicle that night. Of course, my stalker, who did not have a handgun carry permit, who was carrying a gun illegally, brought that gun in and shot Ben 6 times in front of myself and everyone in the middle of the restaurant. And I'll probably wonder for the rest of my life if I could have prevented that. Of course, I'll never know because I was denied a chance.
Gun-free zone is really a ridiculous thing to claim, given that the people you want to stop, the person with murder in his heart, doesn't care whether he's breaking the law or not.
I don't personally believe that carrying a gun makes me invincible, but what I do believe is that it gives me at least a fighting chance.
Right to carry is not just the God-given natural right of the people. With millions of Americans in every state signing up for permits, it is the will of the people. But some states don't care about the rights or the will of the people. States like California and New York, where the poor, vulnerable, unprotected average citizens must beg at the feet of their government for their right to defend themselves and almost never get permission, while the wealthy, the powerful, and the connected have all the freedom they want. That's what equality and justice looks like in an anti-gun utopia. This is the new age of radical Islamic terror, where our shopping malls, parks, schools, office buildings, and sports stadiums are all targets for the jihadi killers among us. But America has one powerful defense that the rest of the world foolishly threw away, or never allowed in the first place: an armed, trained populace. In the face of this threat, the Second Amendment is as relevant and critical as ever.
I feel like a lot of people misconstrue the idea of terrorism in this country. The consistency in which we have seen these terror attacks in this country, we're at war.
We're at war with radical Islam. Actually, it's, to be accurate, they're at war with us.
November 2009, we had a gunman open fire on unarmed soldiers in Fort Hood.
We're tracking the breaking news out of Fort Hood, Texas. There's been a mass shooting at the Army post there. At least 7 people are dead and a number of people are hurt.
In April 2014, we had a gunman open fire on unarmed soldiers in Fort Hood.
It has happened again, a mass shooting at a U.S. military base. Fort Hood, one of the largest Army posts in America, came under attack. At least 16 injured and 4 dead, including the gunman.
In July 2015, you had a gunman open fire on unarmed soldiers in Chattanooga.
An act of domestic terrorism in Chattanooga, Tennessee. The target was the U.S. military.
The theme keeps going.
You look at Fort Hood, where we disarm our soldiers. We don't trust our soldiers stateside to carry weapons on military bases. I mean, that's insane.
And when you talk to some of the survivors, they'll tell you they don't understand why they're capable of handling a firearm in Iraq or Afghanistan, but they come home and live on these bases, still serving their country, and are rendered defenseless.
It makes no sense that they have to live as unarmed people when their very job is to carry and use guns to keep bad guys from getting to us.
You know, I'll walk through a shopping mall. I'm a trained military guy. I start looking around, figuring what would happen if one of these guys decided to come in there with a weapon and start shooting. And knowing that because I live in Los Angeles County and because of the prejudice against the Second Amendment and the exercise of that right, I would not be able to have a weapon.
A leading purpose of the Second Amendment and the Militia Clause is the principle that the armed community keeps itself safe.
Our founding fathers would have wondered what we'd been smoking if they were told that, you know, at a time in which we are facing greater threats, now is the time, and that's the reason why we have to give up our rights.
That's what won that generation its freedom, is farmers and teachers and scientists and shopkeepers taking up arms and fighting the fight.
I don't think they would have looked very kindly upon those in our own society who want us to be sheep in terms of not defending ourselves
before the terrorists who are making attacks right now.
Benjamin Franklin talked about those who sacrifice liberty in the name of security will end up with neither. And I think that is as true today as it was when he said it.
We know that there are violent, dangerous, deadly people who hate us for no other reason than we exist and that we have certain freedoms. I think it is incumbent upon us to realize that we should not cave into fear.
I think the Second Amendment provides one type of protection against terrorism. If we look at the places where the terrorist attacks have taken place, they're all gun-free zones. They're all places where terrorists know they can hurt other people and not meet resistance.
Saturday afternoon, shots and explosions are heard inside the busy, upscale Westgate shopping mall in Nairobi, Kenya.
Westgate Mall is reportedly being held under siege. Shoppers are held by gunmen, and unconfirmed reports indicate that several people have been shot.
The former chief of Interpol said 2 or 3 years ago that going forward, if terrorists continue to prefer low-level strikes rather than spectacular strikes, then countries are going to have to consider increasing the availability of firearms and also permitting their citizens to carry.
You can have a highly armed citizenry in relation to the population and still have a safe country.
Here's an individual who studies this issue. This is his life's work. He hasn't always agreed with the positions of gun owners. But when it comes to being able to fight against terrorism, here's an individual who says, yes, the fact that we have armed citizens can and will make a difference.
Now in America, you don't need to be permitted to carry. It's a constitutional right. In many other countries, you do. Americans in that case have an advantage over others who will have to start the process of obtaining the right to keep and bear arms from scratch.
We've had a significant number of mass shootings in this country from various motivations, which have been thwarted by lawfully armed citizens. And that's not the kind of thing that happens nearly so often in European countries, for example.
Breaking news out of Paris and what, at least at this moment, looks to be a city under terror attack on several fronts.
And now the AP is reporting that at least 100 have been found dead inside that concert hall.
In Texas, there was an event in Garland, and a terrorist who had been on the FBI watch list decided to drive from Arizona to Garland to commit a terrorist attack. He wanted to shoot a bunch of people, much in the same way that the terrorist in Paris wanted to shoot a bunch of people at that nightclub. And when he pulled up, we had law enforcement officers there, because in France, they have to call for backup law enforcement officers that are armed because the first wave aren't armed. And when this terrorist approached and drew down, bang, bang, he was put down by law enforcement. Because in Texas, if you kill us, we kill you back.
The veteran Garland police officer was just about to head back to his patrol car when he saw the men quickly pull up, jump out of a car, and start shooting at the security guard. The officer pulled his service weapon and shot the first gunman, who dropped to the ground. The second one got out. The officer took split-second aim, fired at him. He went down. The threat was over. Both gunmen were dead.
The idea of having armed citizens in public places, I want that to give terrorists a little bit of pause. Not just that they'll be killed at the end of their spree, but that they might be stopped before they even get a chance to start.
I may still die with my gun on my hip in a terrorist situation, but at least I have an option. It's just what it is. I have an option. And so without that option, I am nothing but a sitting duck. That's it.
Whenever terrorism rears its ugly head, we should smite it from the face of the earth whenever possible.
They want to scare us and say, well, we could be anywhere. Well, you know what? Law-abiding, Second Amendment practicing, God-fearing Americans, we can be everywhere too. It's remarkable that the founders provided our greatest strategic advantage in the war on terror over 200 years ago when they codified the Second Amendment. I hope to see more Americans taking seriously the threat of terrorism and taking measures to be prepared. Of course, the most important step will be installing leaders with the courage and principle to identify and eliminate our enemy. But the most powerful weapon we have is our freedom. Not only is the Second Amendment not outdated, it is more relevant to more people than it ever has been in our nation's history. But all of that progress rests on a knife's edge. If the Supreme Court were to reverse its opinion that the Second Amendment applies to all of us as individuals, as the founders clearly intended, every gun ban, every registry of gun owners, and every all-out confiscation scheme we can imagine will be knocking at our door.
I think we're at a dangerous time with the Supreme Court and the Second Amendment. The Heller decision was decided 5-4.
Heller reaffirms the fact that the Second Amendment protects an individual's right to keep and bear arms.
Every person who used the phrase bear arms used it to refer to the use of arms in connection with militia service.
I don't see how there's any contradiction between reading the second clause as a personal guarantee and reading the first one as assuring the existence of a militia. The two clauses go together beautifully.
Heller was the first time since 1939 where the Supreme Court really took on the Second Amendment squarely.
I mean, a lot of people said, is this really the first time that the Supreme Court is ruling on the Second Amendment? Well, the answer is yes. We've got a decision today from the highest court in the land. It's an individual right.
The 1939 case had been subject to a variety of different interpretations. That was United States versus Miller.
At that time, the theory was invented that the Second Amendment doesn't protect individual rights, it protects the power of states to maintain militias. And a lot of federal courts bought into that.
The court in 2008 decided to provide some clarity and said that, sure, the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms, the right of the people, is a normal American right that belongs to normal Americans.
Bottom line of Heller, the District of Columbia could not ban handguns.
The majority opinion was written by Antonin Scalia.
The Second Amendment refers to it as though it were a pre-existing right. It didn't say the people shall have the right, or even the government shall not take away arms, but rather the right of the people to keep and bear, as though it was a pre-existing right.
Antonin Scalia, unfortunately, is no longer with us, which means the court is 4-4. And were there a similar case to come up, it looks as if the court would be deadlocked.
And when the Heller decision came out, that was June of 2008, immediately thereafter lawsuits were filed against the Chicago and other Illinois jurisdictions that also banned handguns. The issue became there, does the Second Amendment apply to the states?
This case is really a sequel to the 2008 decision in which the court held that there is an individual right to own a gun in the home for self-defense, personal safety.
And in 2010, in the McDonald versus Chicago case, the court finally got around to issuing a decision about that in regards to the 14th Amendment. And it said, yes, the Second Amendment is a fundamental right, and therefore the 14th Amendment requires state and local governments to respect that right just as much as the federal government has to.
Had the makeup of the court been different, 5-4 the other way, the Second Amendment might have been just thrown into the dustbin of history.
With respect to the McDonald decision, we're talking really about the fact that your ability to own a gun, to have a gun in your house, is what's on the table.
When was the last time that the people of this country have been told something that you thought was a right is actually wrong, and we're taking it away from you?
The Supreme Court is already in a crisis of confidence with its uncanny ability to find essential rights that aren't spelled out within the Constitution. If it takes the next step and abandons rights that are expressly set forth in the Constitution, I think it sheds all pretense of legitimacy in the eyes of millions and millions of Americans.
What we'd be looking at is states like Massachusetts, Connecticut, New York, California, implementing laws that were unimaginable even 10 years ago, whatever they choose.
The biggest example I tell people with regards to the placement of an anti-gun justice on the Supreme Court is to look at what's happening right now in California. These are the things that are on the table if a anti-gunner is positioned or nominated and confirmed to the United States Supreme Court.
I don't think criminals would have decreased access to firearms if we banned the Second Amendment or if we all of a sudden said it's negated. Just look at what's going on in countries around the world that have done things like this. In 2012, Venezuela banned gun ownership for civilians.
Ante las cámaras, la policía de Caracas procede a la destrucción de decenas de armas. Es el arranque de una campaña con la que el gobierno pretende reducir la inseguridad.
Caracas, Venezuela, is now the most violent city in the world. Things haven't gotten better, they've gotten worse.
If you are allowed to have a gun in England, you have to have it locked up, you have to have the ammunition separate, it has to be disassembled, it cannot be accessible for self-defense. If you use a firearm in England for self-defense, it's a clear indication, prima facie evidence that you have committed a crime. And those people are commonly prosecuted for injuring criminals.
I hesitate to think of the consequences if the Supreme Court tells people they don't have this right.
You would see a lot of good, law-abiding, peaceful people turned overnight into criminals, either because they would refuse to comply with the harsher edges of the law, or because they would remain ignorant of them.
I just read a report that in Germany today they've got universal compelled registration of all firearms, and it's maybe 1 in 4 is registered. And that's a very law-abiding society.
If Heller and McDonald were overturned by the Supreme Court, I think that you would see a mass rejection of the ruling by a number of Americans across the country. There's a reason why Heller and McDonald were ruled in the way that they were the first time around.
The dumbest argument I've heard for gun control laws, or more gun control laws, is the idea that it would prevent the people we don't want to have guns from having them. It is dumb. It's dumb, 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 dumb.
Surveillance video shows 3 suspects entering the store and going right to the gun display cases.
In all, more than 200 guns stolen from around the Bay Area.
The man is seen clearly on the video smashing a glass case and taking pistols.
They're all going to the street where they're going to be sold on the street, and the overwhelming majority of them are going to be used in other crimes.
If the criminal is getting around every gun control that's in place right now, he is also going to get around a gun ban, an all-out gun ban. He's going to get around it. And when he does, the law-abiding citizen is going to be in a doubly worse position because it's going to be illegal for him to defend his life or for her to defend her life with a firearm.
He went from victim of an armed robbery inside his home to a possible suspect for killing one of the men who tied him up at gunpoint and robbed him.
You know, you might be able to own a gun and have it in your home, but if you can't have that gun physically on you in public, what do you do when, like in my case, when a stalker shows up at your work?
To again be just at the mercy of a government official to protect you or defend your rights, to not be able to make those kinds of decisions for yourself and your family, to say the best I can do is lay there and hope for the best because I don't have the choice to defend myself, that would be a huge step back.
An overturning of Heller means that I am going to be a sitting duck. It means I will be a soft target. And not just me, but millions of other law-abiding Americans. The principle behind the Second Amendment can never be outdated. The right of law-abiding citizens to defend themselves and their families against any violent injustice will be the foundation of any truly free society forever. The question is, how much longer will America be truly free? No government can give us our freedom, but any government can take it away. It is ours to use and ours to fight for, always.